Hello, everybody. Brent Hubbs of Volquest.com. Got a special project that I'm happy to be a part and involved in coming up throughout the next few months. It's a podcast project called Beyond the Tee, and it takes a look at former players' lives in all sports, not just football, but guys who are involved in college athletics in the University of Tennessee. It's a great project. Leonard Little, Charlie Garner, all these guys. You name them, we're going to be able to talk to them. And part of the reason why we're going to be able to talk to them is from a college athletics veteran. And that's the co-host of this program, Beyond the Tee, and it's Carmen Tegano. For those of you who don't know who Carmen Tegano is a 40-year veteran of college athletics. And Carmen, your career started at Virginia Tech. Why did you get into college athletics?
It just kind of happened. I coached for a while, Brent. I coached in high school and I coached in college and got fired. Most of the places where I was coaching. And my wife and I decided to go to graduate school. We got fired at Austin Peay, decided to go to graduate school at Virginia Tech. And I was going to go into administration, like maybe student personnel, dean of students, something like that. And a job opened up at Virginia Tech. And I look back on that job and I did so many things. I was in charge of academics, eligibility, travel, on-campus recruiting, the dorm. And nowadays they got, they have 20 people doing that. But I worked for Bill Dooley. And as a side note, I'm going to tell you this, Brent. I don't think you know many people that have worked for 4 Hall of Fame coaches: Bill Dooley, John Majors, Doug Dickey, and Phil Fulmer. So I've had a really, what I call a lucky career. And it started with Bill Dooley at Virginia Tech. And I learned a lot of how to do things his way. And that was okay, because he knew how to do things. And carried on to Tennessee. I'll tell you another quick story. When my wife finished her doctorate at Virginia Tech, we moved her for her job, basically. And Bill Dooley sent a letter to John Majors about me, and he called him. And John Majors returned the letter, sent a letter to me, and I still have it. And it's addressed to Miss MS Carmen Tegano. He thought I was a woman.
So you knew about the state of Tennessee from your time at Austin Peay, but the reason you came to Rocky Top was because of your wife's career. That's what drew you to Tennessee, right?
Exactly. And they had a fella that was doing the job I did at Virginia Tech, a smaller version of it, and he had a history with Doug Dickey that wasn't good at Colorado.
Okay.
And I said to my wife, I said, if you can get this job and Doug Dickey becomes the athletic director, because there were 3 candidates to become athletic director: Doug Dickey, Bob Markham, and Henry Lee Parker. And I said, if Doug Dickey gets this job, the guy who's there is going to be out because Doug will fire him. So let's roll the dice and go.
Wow.
So, yeah. So we rolled the dice, and we get here. And we're home painting the kitchen. I was like the 4th person in that office. I was an associate athletic director of Virginia Tech. I was the 4th person in the office. The job that I took, like $14,000 a year, I forget what it was. And I got a phone call from Mike Strange. And he said, "This is Carmen Tegano." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, listen," he said, "you've been named director of academic support for the athletic department." I said, "I never interviewed for the job." He said, "Well, the guy left and it's your job." That's how it started. Yeah, you can ask Mike Strange that.
Yeah, what a crazy career that spans 4 decades in college athletics, and that part of the reason why I wanted to do this project with you is because of the history that you know at the University of Tennessee, the stories, the behind the scenes thing with student athletes, the personal stories with the student athletes because of your involvement with them. Were you always driven to know the athlete beyond the helmet, so to speak, beyond the ball cap or the uniform? But because that is how I always have associated you, Carmen, is a guy who's knows a student athlete for the whole embodiment of who they are, not just them as the player.
That's a great question. When I coached, I was like that. When I coached in high school and I coached at Austin Peay, I spent time getting to know the kids. I'd walk with them after practice to their car to see their parents, whatever, find out who were. I coached in downtown Fort Lauderdale. Boyd Anderson, Miramar, and Dillard. You've heard of those high
Oh,
schools.
absolutely.
I coached at those schools in Fort Lauderdale. And you have to understand the kid you're coaching. How far can you push them? How far you can't, but it's based on their background. And if you get to know a kid off the field, okay, then you know them better. And so when I got into what I did that was off the field, you have to know the kid just the opposite, Brent. I know it's confusing, but follow me. If a great football player walked into my office with a problem, we didn't talk about football. We addressed the problem and we addressed why it was a problem. And then he would get into stuff about his family, his background, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And that's just what I've always been pretty good at, getting to know a kid, because once you get a kid to break down and talk to you, now you've bridged the gap, and that you created a bridge, and that's what it's all about.
All right, last thing about you and your personal resume, because I know how much you love talking about your your accomplishments. Did the fact that you were a coach and you had coached at the high school level and the college level, how much did that help you in this transition with the current coaches that you were working with? That you weren't an academician administrator. You were a guy who had been on their side of the fence as well. Did that help you in kind of encircling the trust in the entire athletic department?
Yeah. What you have to do is understand there's a head coach, and among a lot of things, he wants to know what's best for his program, and you can't put your needs ahead of that person. It's a team effort. And by working as a coach and playing, I understood the team effort. I've seen guys in administrative roles, Brent, who thought their job was bigger than the whole department. And you can't do that. It's a team effort. And I remember a quick story. When I worked for Bill Dooley one day, I got really mad at a kid, DC kid, really got mad at him. I cussed him. He cussed me. I thought he was going to attack me. And he left the office. And I went down, told Coach Dooley, I said, Coach Dooley, this kid's a problem, blah, 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 blah. And Coach Dooley looked at me, Brent. He said, just in this southern, he said, Carmen, he said, your job here is to get the most out of that young man that you can. And when he leaves campus, then we have failed. You have got to put your ego aside and understand you and me are here because of him. And that just resonated with me. And that changed my outlook on a lot of things. That 1 minute, that 2 minute meeting with Bill Dooley, I walked out and thought to myself, no one's coming to this stadium to see me or Bill Dooley or any of those coaches play. They're coming to see these kids, and it's about supporting these kids the best we can. And the motto we had at University of Tennessee was, until that kid got up and turned the light off, there was still hope.
And over the span of, you mentioned, your 30 plus years at Tennessee, over that span, and even going back to Virginia Tech days, the model, maybe the core of the model is the same, but the model has had its shifts. And what I mean by that is the money is so much different now for coaches and administrators. You mentioned the volume of people that are there, and the athletes. There's an empowerment for the athlete in a way that's shifted throughout the decades, but it's in a great shift right now. When you view kind of your entire career of where things in athletics were when you started to where they are now, what are your biggest kind of takeaways from that, Carmen? And what do you think of kind of the direction things are going in the future?
I'll tell you, when I first started in this, there were a lot of kids. I had to do the recruiting visits every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday for the last 40 years when I was in college athletics. I had to do the recruiting visits you were well aware of. I can remember Virginia Tech, kids coming in on recruiting visits, first person in their family to go to college. Came in with a mother, maybe an aunt, maybe a grandmother. Okay. And gradually, as I came to Tennessee and the years went along, you saw kids now coming in with two parents. All right. And they asked really great questions because maybe one of the two parents was educated, maybe not. And you could see the transition of the kids we were recruiting, and they were asking really good questions. And now with all this NIL, I think I think kids are going to be able to manage this better than the average person thinks. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but this NIL now has opened up doors for kids. And I think they're better equipped today to manage it than they were 30 years ago because of the home lives that changed. And there's more education within the homes of kids today. And I think once this NIL hits the ground and more money's being funneled, we'll talk about that later. I think I think kids are going to be able to manage it. That's the thing. One of the things I've seen change the most is the quality of the young man who's going to college today as opposed to 40 years ago.
So is that quality not meaning necessarily that they're better people, but quality meaning they're more educated about life, they're more educated about the sort of the do's and don'ts and what they should be looking for. They're not caught up in the fanciest buildings, Carmen, or the prettiest uniforms. Is that what you mean by better quality there?
Yeah, their lens are a lot wider, and they
Okay.
understand their value. They have a value, Brent. These kids that fill 100,000 people in a Neyland Stadium, they have a value. They understand that value, and it's not going to be, I think, a situation where it's abused. A young man comes in right now. He comes to Tennessee. He has a great freshman year, and his position coach leaves for more money somewhere. Okay. Well, he helped that position coach get that other job because he had a great year. There's a lot of other factors. I know that. But this young man now is thinking to himself, well, I had a wonderful year. I scored all these touchdowns. I did this. I did that. My coach just left. Well, I have a value. Does that make sense or not? I don't know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think for kids, Carmen, there's so much information out there. They see that the Big Ten has just agreed to a rights fee deal that's $7.5 billion for their conference, and I think that's what's led us to the NIL world. Is everybody for years there's been talk of how does the student athlete get a slice of the pie, right? How do they get something in return beyond just their education? Now, a lot of people feel like the education should be enough for them. Okay, that's what they should have, and they should be thankful for that, and that's their reward for their investment. You've seen all sides of that. It sounds like you're pro NIL, that you think that student athletes are deserving of what's going on right now.
I can recall, and Tim Irwin was there. He dragged me into it. I went to the law school and talked about agents. He had a group of young lawyers. He was in law school, and he wanted me to come talk about agents. And I made the mistake of saying, this was 1987, something like that, and it was in the Journal. Randy Moore covered it. And I said something, athletes should be paid beyond a scholarship for their time. And I listed all the amount of time that it takes to be a football player at the University of Tennessee. I went through everything all the time. And the next day, headlines. Tegano says athletes should be paid. Well, who do you think's the first person who walked in my office? And he sat down, Brent, and he looked at me. I'm really like listening. He said, Tegano, I read your article today in the paper. I read it. Where the hell do you think this money's coming from? And I said, well, Coach, I don't know. Well, you need to think about that because we can't afford to pay these guys. We're giving them a scholarship. We get them summer jobs. They're happy. I think to myself, no, they're not really. I never voiced a strong opinion. But if you spend a day with a football player in the middle of August or the middle of September, just a day with him, you realize how hard it is. And the average person says, well, they're getting an education. Well, okay, they're getting an education. But to some of these kids, they have a God-given talent that maybe supersedes the degree right now. Because you see, Brent, the university isn't closing down. But that kid's knee or shoulder isn't going to last forever. So if a kid comes to the university and he says to himself, okay, I'm going to be here 3 years, and I'm going to make most of these 3 years. I'm going to get a bit faster, bigger, stronger, and make sure I get touches or make sure I get sacks or whatever. And I'm going to go to the league and make as much money as I can. I'll come back later and finish school. What's wrong with that?
No, I mean it's what's been done for forever.
And now you're getting kids who are going to get paid for their efforts. And I think it's really a grand thing. We have to be careful that we don't judge a kid making $100,000 and what he does with that $100,000. It's not us to judge. And I think more times than not, the kid's going to do the right thing.
The toothpaste obviously is out of the tube with the ruling a year ago. It's kind of the wild, wild west. You've seen monumental changes in college athletics. You have studied monumental changes in college athletics, from scholarship limitations to no scholarship limitations to what you can and you can't do and all of these things. It is at some point one would think that there's some kind of governance to limit the wild, wild west feel. Or do you think it's an unfair notion to describe it as the wild, wild west with where things are right now?
Well, let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
One thing we know for sure in college athletics, Brent, we're 100% sure of. I've watched it I remember when Len Bias unfortunately died. Okay. What happened after that? Drug education testing, trainers, more therapists, more counselors, more testing. Prop 48 came into effect. And what happened? Bigger academic offices, more counselors, more tutors. All right. All of that to say that athletics, and Doug Dickey always said this, them now. It's a knee-jerk reaction. Athletics have always been a knee-jerk entity. Something happens, we're going to take off behind it. There was an arms race in the 90s and early 2000s. School A built a building, School B built a bigger building. So School C built the biggest building. And so now we're in this NIL situation, and I don't think it's going to be a wild, wild west. I got a couple points here to talk about it based on my history, but I don't think it's going to be. I think it can be accomplished in a manner where they put a governance on the amount of money that's being paid to the kids, and how do you do it? What's the methodology? What's the formula? I don't know that, but there has to be a formula. There has to be a methodology established for kids. And Brent, you know this better than I do. We're going to wake up in a couple of years. There's only going to be 40 schools doing this. Am I right or wrong?
That's what it feels like. It feels like that's the direction everything that it's going. I mean, you see what the Big Ten's doing, and you see where the SEC is. And as Greg Sankey said earlier back in July, we're already a super conference. It kind of feels like those are the two. How many are in that conference remains to be seen, but that kind of feels like the way it's going with, maybe the ACC trying to hang on there.
Yeah. So there's going to be 30, 35 teams that will be playing for these college football playoffs and be going to the major bowl games. Who doesn't make the college football playoffs? So now we're going to be able to govern a little better once they get a football czar. It's a term that, I guess that's the word now. Once they get that guy to run the football programs. And NIL factors into this. If you don't get in the NIL game, you're not going to be one of the 40, or you're not going to be competing ever at the top of the 40. You're always going to be 38, 39, and 40. You have to get in the NIL. And we've been lucky. I'm telling you, the University of Tennessee is pretty lucky that Spire jumped on board early on. Now, I don't know what year was it when the Supreme Court, when you're retired, it's like 6 Saturdays, then they bring a fat newspaper. So I lose track of days. But when was it? 21 or 20 when Supreme Court voted 9-0?
It was basically 14 months ago.
Okay, so the 21. All right, so they passed it 9-0, and a lot of people didn't believe it was going to get passed. Oh, they'll never pass paying these athletes. Well, it was a 9-0 unanimous vote. That tells you something. We were lucky. The Spire Group got involved and spent some time understanding our athletes, current athletes, understanding what the big picture was. And they hit the ground running. They went out and they created their collective, Spire, and I'm telling you, they're an asset. And we have to somehow, as a university, as a community, as a state, understand that. We were talking about mergers here. conference mergers and realignment, you know, Southern Cal and UCLA are going to the Big Ten. Southern Cal is a football power, one of the greatest powers in the history of college football. UCLA is an up-and-coming program, but they have the greatest tight end coach in the country, I might add, at UCLA. I'll throw that plug in there for Jeffrey Ferris. Anyway, so they're going to the Big Ten, okay? Now we're bringing in Texas and Oklahoma. Now give that some thought. This is the word I want you to think about during the next few minutes: relevance. Being relevant in college football, okay? Have we been relevant in the last 15 years?
Well, I think the answer to that from a national standpoint is no.
Okay. So now we're bringing in two more programs, okay? Texas and Oklahoma. National championships in the last 10, 15 years. Heisman Trophy winners. Now Texas is down, I get it, all right? But these two schools are coming into the Southeastern Conference, and they're not going to shop at Dollar General. They're not coming in here to look for bargains. They're coming in here to win this conference. They're coming in here to beat the Alabamas and the Floridas and the LSUs and the Tennessees. That's why they're coming to this conference. And they've embraced NIL, have they not?
Yeah. I mean, again, you said it earlier. I mean, I think you're seeing everybody, it's taken some schools longer than others, but if you want to be relevant, to borrow your word, it's hard to look at the landscape of college athletics and say you're going to be relevant without an NIL plan.
Exactly. You have to have a plan. And I'm not really sure. This is where the rubber hits the road, Brent. I'm not really sure how it's going to play out the next 2 or 3 years. Because think about this for a minute, okay? We have a university. We have an athletic department. And within the athletic department, we have a development office. And their job is to raise money. And they're pretty good at what they do. In the past, you got to remember, you go back when Doug Dickey got here, I think 10 development officers left the University of Tennessee and became athletic directors. Think about it for a minute. We can talk about that later. Okay, they have a really good office there. And the guy that runs it now, he's out there working hard to raise money. All right, but there's only so many dollars on the table. Okay, so the athletic department wants dollars for facilities, dollars to pay coaches, dollars to pay staff. But yeah, you have to have Jimmys and Joes. Who's going to pay the Jimmys and Joes? Where's that money going to keep coming from? I think that there's a support right now, pretty significant support for James Clausen and Spire, but that can't continue. There has to be other revenue streams. So somewhere along the line, either the athletic department or the university, somewhere there has to be a joint effort to combine that money or to increase that money, because collectives are going to need support. They're not going away. Collectives are here to stay. And James Clausen and his group can go out and raise money, but the university is trying to raise the same money. I think one of the things that, I think one of the things that can happen, I think already has happened. Spire has a website where you can donate like $25 a month or something like that. Is that right?
Yes, you can donate. You can. They have a website where you can make a monthly donation of some kind.
Yeah, that has to, the public has to understand how important that is. Because let me give you an example. All right. The biggest fear I have with NIL, biggest fear. Everyone's talking about, the high school kids. No. The biggest problem is kids leaving and going to another school for a bigger NIL. Case in point, the Biletnikoff Award winner left Pitt to go. That's the best receiver in the country. This isn't just a receiver. This was the best receiver in the country. Side note, I played on the Freddie Biletnikoff field. I grew up in Erie where Freddie went to school. Okay. Anyway, so they went and this kid left Pitt to go to Southern Cal. All right. Let's just imagine we're moving along this year in the football season and we're doing pretty well. Hendon Hooker's putting up big numbers. We're winning games. And he tweaks his ankle before Martin. And Josh says, I can sit you down. We got 3 or 4 games left. We got a bowl game. We're moving along pretty well. I'm going to sit you down, rest your ankle. So this kid from Indiana, what's his name?
Taven Jackson.
Taven Jackson comes in, throws 6 touchdown passes against Martin, rushed for 150 yards, has a Heisman game. Okay. Well, now he has video. Now he has tape. Okay. And we're bringing in a freshman quarterback. So is this Jackson kid, what's he going to do? Transfer portal. He can go in December. Okay. So what do? We go to the collective and we come up with Jackson's Pizza Stop or Jackson's Car Sales or something like that. And we market the kid. Okay. We go to Spire to keep that kid. All right. See, we don't think transferring from school to school is an issue because we haven't lost a Blitnikoff Award winner. We haven't lost that kid yet. When that happens, people understand that's the downside, and you have to have a strong collective.
Because in a world where, I mean, it's free, it feels like it's free agency potentially every year. Now, some kids are going to go and roll the dice and probably end up getting burned, thinking that they're probably worth more than what they're worth. But that will adjust itself out, right? At some point, I mean, kids will figure that out, correct?
Yeah. Eventually they will, because as I said earlier, they're smarter kids. But money's money. Okay. If my NIL across the street's a little bigger than NIL here, I got to look at a lot of things. I got to factor. Do I like Willie Martinez? Do I like Rodney Garner? Do I like Josh Heupel? Do I like walking into that building? The one thing that Josh Heupel done a lot of good things. We got a great coach over there, great person, great coach. But the few times I've been over there since he's been head coach, I've noticed a different vibe. There's a great vibe in that building, and head coach is going to have to create that vibe that they didn't want to create before to keep kids. You're not going to be able to just run kids in the ground every day and think they're going to stay, okay? Because they're a little bit smarter and think to themselves, wait a minute, I don't have to put up with this. I can go somewhere else. Well, Josh Heupel has done an excellent job of creating an environment that's conducive to wanting to be here. Okay, and that's a big plus. But, again, let me go back to the central question. Where's the funding going to come from other than collective down the road? There has to be more models. This monthly payment's a model. But I think that, what did Ryan Day say? He needed $13 million at Ohio State.
Yeah.
He came right out and said that. And it's here to stay. It's just how's the athletic department going to deal with it? One other thing I want to say, and I got a few other things here, but we talk about the golden era of Tennessee football in the 80s and 90s. John Majors, Phil Fulmer, Doug Dickey, Peyton Manning, all these great players. We had Al Wilson, Leonard Little, Jamal Lewis, that 1990 class that Chuck Smith talked about. That was the golden era of Tennessee football. One of the reasons why it was the golden era? One of the reasons why it was the golden era was because there was an alignment between the president, the chancellor, and Doug Dickey. They were on the same page. They put their egos aside and they solve problems collectively. Well, from what I've heard right now, we have that same thing on campus. President Boyd, sports guy, he gets it. Dante came from Nebraska. She understands it. And the athletic director is in athletics. So we have 3 people that are on the same page. The only thing missing the golden age for right now, Tennessee football, are Jimmy's and Joe's. It's the only thing missing. Everything else is in place. New facility, great leadership on campus, a good football coach. But as Skippy Brown says, if you don't have Jimmy's and Joe's, you're going home early. I can remember one day he looked over at Ron Zook. He said, yeah, Ron, my Jimmy's are kicking your Joe's asses too. Don't forget that. That's what it comes down to, Jimmy's and Joe's.
Well, it's a story as old as time. I mean, it was Jimmy's and Joe's in 1980. It was Jimmy's and Joe's in 1990. It's been Jimmy's and Joe's for 40 years, and it always will be. That's what's made college athletics survive. It's not the buildings on campus. It's not the uniforms. It's the Jimmy's and the Joe's. That's what puts fans in the stands. That's what generates the money. The Big Ten's not getting that money without Jimmy's and Joe's, right?
Exactly. When I came here from Virginia Tech in 1985, the facilities here were horrible. They were horrible. I can't. I said to myself, I'm at the University of Tennessee. Look at these facilities. But guess what? They had a hell of a lot more Jimmys and Joes than Virginia Tech did. And they won that year, and they won a lot of games. And then Doug Dickey came along as athletic director and supported the building. But they won. They had players. They knew how to get players. They were outstanding recruiters and good coaches. So and there's another thing too, and you know this better than I do. You're not going to win in the Southeastern Conference without depth. That's as important as anything else on football teams. You have to have depth. And with these NILs, you can create more depth with players who don't want as much. They just want to be a part of something. Like what did Texas Tech do? They gave every football player $25,000.
Right.
Is that right? Well, have we done that?
No.
Well, okay, that's Texas Tech. So we have got to figure out the model that's conducive to Tennessee being relevant again. Because as I told you before, as we just said a minute ago, in the last 15 years, when have we been relevant? 07, went to the SEC championship game. 16, when Butch was here, we won the top 10, right? Beat Florida, beat Georgia, beat Virginia Tech. Okay, that's 2 years. What else?
It's been a long time. That's why there's been so much turnover.
Yeah, this is the University of Tennessee. It shouldn't be like that. Well, now we have a kid who's running a football program, is pretty good at what he does. Players like him, people like him. He's got a great scheme. He throws it around the yard. And he needs players. He's only as good as his players. And I think we have the perfect coach to get behind right now. Perfect coach. Nothing against Jeremy, Butch, Derek, or Lane, or Philip. But right now we have a coach where everyone can rally behind. And we have to do it. And it's going to have to come through NIL.
That's from a man who's got 40 years of athletics in his blood. He's covered and worked in athletics in every capacity under the sun. I wanted to introduce everybody to Carmen Tegano. I wanted to give his thoughts on the evolution of college athletics and also introduce you to the fact that he and I are going to do something, or we're doing a project this fall that we're both extremely excited about. We're going to talk to those Jimmys and Joes that made Tennessee relevant in all sports. And we're going to talk to newsmakers in this sport that are tied to Tennessee, that are some of the elite Jimmys and Joes outside of the game in terms of players. You're going to enjoy this podcast. It's going to be a lot of fun, a lot of old stories being told, updates on how guys are doing now, their journey through college athletics, their thoughts on NIL and where the growth of the game is right now. All of that in this series that we call Beyond the Tee, that's going to be co-hosted by the guy you just heard, the great Carmen Tegano, and myself, and it's going to be a lot of fun. You'll want to check it out all fall long. That is Beyond the Tee. We want to thank our friends at Spire, who's helped us be involved in this, and obviously we've got a couple other things, Carmen, going on that we're going to talk about throughout the podcast where you can help. We've also got some fundraising available for the Wounded Warrior Project that we're going to unveil to you in the coming weeks as well. Lots of things going on with this podcast that you can get involved in, not just listening, but participating in all things going on in the world of college athletics.
That's very well put. Yeah, we created some stuff that's going to help the Wounded Warrior Project, help Spire, and promote, for instance, this hat right here, promote NIL, because it's the future. There's no way around it. It's here to stay, and we want Tennessee to be competitive. You love the program. I love the program. It's a part of my life for over almost 40 years, and we want us to be competitive. So I appreciate you allowing me to come on and doing these shows with me, Brent. I really do. I've had some people ask me in the past to do something like this, but I know I picked a really good partner when I asked you to do it. And during these shows, when I refer to you as Kenny, we'll give a prize to the first guy who figures out why I call you Ken. Okay?
That's Carmen Tegano. This is episode 1 of